compliance versus voluntary markets. We'll spend a lot of time with who's who. It's important to know who you're talking to. And maybe better yet, we'll see at the last slide is what's their experience in the market, how long they've been doing it. No solutions, right? We're going to go through and just look at some stuff. I'll go into how they're calculated. A lot of the counterfactual baseline stuff is calculated the same way. And then I get a little bit here on small landowners and new people in the market. There's a link at the bottom here. This follows a lot of work we've done here at Idaho to kind of, I guess, consolidate into a single 2-pager. Link at the bottom. You could look there. Daria Paxton, who now works for Washington DNR, is a silviculturalist, put this all together. But this, of course, was back in 2022. Lots changed since then. Start with terminology. Basic terminology, you'll hear offset and credit. And so I picked 2 sources here that describe what that is. And in general, you could read these or not read these, but an offset is what you do. You're going to offset your emission, what you make somewhere, with someone else's good behavior or sequestration somewhere else. And so you offset your emissions. That's an activity, what you do. And how you do it is a carbon credit. And this is a transportable instrument. So you have to be able to measure it. It goes through independent bodies, and it's almost always representing 1 metric ton of CO2 or CO2e or equivalent. And it's tradable, verifiable, and you'll follow it through the registry. So you'll hear them used back and forth, and I'll probably be bad that way too. Offsets what you do, credits how you do it. And we can move from there. 2 other kind of thing. I'll go in 2s here a little bit in the beginning because I've heard that's all people can hold in their brain. 2 important terms, stocks and fluxes. And for all of you that are cringing now when I say fluxes, I'm talking stock change, sure, but we're going to squint and say it's a flux. So stocks are the pictures in this graph from the Forest Service, right? They're the trees that are out there. They're the furniture and the houses that you have. It's the pellets and that sort of thing waiting to go into biomass. Fluxes are the arrows. And so they represent some sort of change in those pictures. So when carbon's moving, it's following those arrows. It's either going, in this case, between accounts, terrestrial accounts, or out into atmospheric accounts. The other thing that gets confusing is carbon stocks are usually carbon, and that would be positive in terrestrial accounts. When we do atmospheric, when we go CO2, we usually do negatives in the terrestrial accounts because it's a negative out of the atmosphere. There's only really 2 concepts that I try to break things down to in carbon credits as well. So you have reliability, issues related to reliability. So it needs to be some sort of emission reduction or sequestration that's additional. So you've done something that wouldn't have been done otherwise. So it needs to have additionality. And the second thing is you need to account for on-site and off-site effects or leakage. When you do something, there's a counteracting thing that happens, whether it's through the market, or through, say, logging equipment that's out there, activities that are going on. You need to account for that to be a reliable credit. The second thing is durability. They need to stick around. And so one way we account for that is through how long a project is set to last. So if you know that's the time frame over which you're going to sequester or store this carbon, right, that's good to know. And we also need to insure against unforeseen losses. So there needs to be an insurance pool, a buffer pool, a reserve pool, someplace that you're putting the credits into, extra credits, in case there are these unforeseen emissions that we'll touch on a little later as well. So reliability, durability. Reliability, think additionality and leakage. Durability, you can think about time frame or permanence, and buffer pools or insurance. Stocks, again, to go back to the stocks and the flux thing, people get hung up on stocks. They don't matter. The only way a stock matters is if it affects the flux. Because if you think about why we're doing this, it's to reduce the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So we want to see a movement out of the atmosphere. and that's a flux. And so we're going to track those stock changes or fluxes. Don't care about the stocks unless it affects how that goes. Okay, so, and that's these arrows, right? These are what I care about when I'm doing a carbon offset project or when I'm evaluating a carbon offset project. So let's talk about who's who. So first off, it always starts in offsets at that land base. Someone's going to do something. They're going to provide the land and they're going to do something different on that land base to store more carbon, get carbon out of the atmosphere. That carbon is going to be quantified somehow. So a lot of people use project developers for this. And they're going to provide an interaction with the registry and make sure that we follow the rules, the methodology. We'll touch on that next. Right, so a project developer may be involved. Doesn't have to be the case. We've seen Weyerhaeuser do their own projects. We've seen Green Diamond do their own projects, right? They can be the same thing, but typically it's a second person involved. Some of those credits are going to be reduced for things like cruise. If your cruise error is higher than a certain percent, depending on the methodology, there will be credits deducted there. There's going to be leakage deductions, that sort of thing, and you're going to put some of those credits or some of that carbon into a reserve pool that we talked about to protect the durability of those carbons. And then the carbon moves forward, it goes to the registry. That's got this protocol or methodology, and it also tracks the carbon credits. So they get kind of barcoded, tracked over time. When you sell it, it knows who has it. When they retire it, when they use it to offset some of their emissions, they use that credit to offset their emissions, they will retire it at the registry. In between, you're going to interact with a verifier, and this is a third-party independent verification company that makes sure that you followed all of the rules and that your cruise, your measurement was intact before it gets to that registry. Then you got a bunch of buyers. You have corporations, you have individuals, right? We have compliance as well. I'm talking voluntary here. They're going to buy those credits and they're going to use those credits to offset their emissions and meet their greenhouse gas goals. Somewhere in between, though, there might be a broker involved. And so we've seen those brokers change a little bit over time. In the beginning, the brokers were kind of amassing credits in more of a speculative manner, in that you would buy the credits, you'd store the credits thinking that the prices were going to go up. These days, those brokers are someone maybe more like Carbon Direct, where they're looking at ensuring the quality of the credits so that the buyer is protected from, let's say, bad press or not understanding how the project was developed and what the quality of the credits are. So these are all the people that are out there. Those buyers are going to pay some money here. The broker's going to take a cut. Registry gets cut, right? They got to pay those credits out there. Verifiers get paid. Project developers get paid. We got a little arrow coming back. So there's a lot of different movement in the system, but these are the basic people that are involved in the project. Brokers as well, the new group that's come up are you'll have ratings agencies, and we'll touch on them later, and they will rate your project so that buyers have an idea of how the quality, the integrity of those credits as well. So registries versus programs. So we're going to hit terms here. A registry. So I'm going to stick with improved forest management. We're talking forest carbon here. We have three primary registries that we use in the United States. So there's Verra or VCS. I'm going to link there for it. ACR used to be the American Carbon Registry, but now just ACR. And we'll link for it there. And then the Climate Action Reserve used to be before, well, the California Climate Action Reserve. So everyone's kind of changed their name a little bit, but three primary registries. And their job is to oversee the process and ensure that those credits are valid, and they'll track the retirement of them. So barcoding, tracking the credits. I think there's some blockchain stuff. I think Raju's talked about that before. In new ways that we can look at doing that, but that's their primary function. Verification happens within the registry. So I'm kind of cheesing here off of a VCS drawing, but I'm making it a little my own. Each registry has a process that you follow to become a validation verification body for that registry. And they maintain a list of those verifiers. So they need to be third-party independent verifiers that understand the standards and methodologies of the program that they are verifying. Right? They have to register with that registry, and there's a list of them. You can find it out on the website. This is an example of ACR's registry, where you have all of these different people. We know who they are. For improved forest management, right? Aster Global's been a big one. SNA Carbon, like them. SCS, or out here Ruby Canyon. They've done the majority of the verifications of the improved forest management projects out there. We also know what methodologies they can verify. So in this case, improved forest management, we write down here, and I can follow across and see who can verify and validate projects for me if I have an improved forest management project that I want to do there. Last, I've got how do I contact them? I've got names, emails, information. All of this is maintained at the registry. You cannot verify a project using someone that is not on this list and current with that registry. You will fail. You can fail these verifications. So onward, we're inside our verification now. There is a program that is there. So ACR, in this case, I'm showing, they have a program. That program has a document that typically represents the standards of the program. Those are those, as you can read on the front, requirements, specifications for the quantification, monitoring, reporting, and registration of project-based greenhouse gas emissions, reductions, and removals. So it's got the science behind it and the things that are common among the various different project types, like methane from landfill and forests. They'll be guided under the standard. But when you move beyond that overarching standard, you will also have methodologies or protocols that you follow, and that describes how you quantify the credits that you have. So each program, the program that is in that registry, has standards that guide the overarching project development and methodologies that you use to quantify the projects. Last thing you hit in these things are tools or resources. And these are things that are specific to the methodologies within the registries that tell you things like how you handle leakage, what your buffer pool contribution will be, or how you're going to handle harvested wood products. These things are tools or resources that are specific to those methodologies. They're pretty similar in the end, but they're different, and so you have to use the ones that are specific to that methodology. One of my favorite tools is the calculation spreadsheet for ACR's improved forest management. And it has basically how you apply the methodology. It's got equations in the methodology. They're listed here in rows in this spreadsheet. And there are parameters that are in those equations in the methodology, and they're listed here as well. And so if you put something in this spreadsheet that's related to kind of an activity schedule of a project, it will apply the methodology, calculate the credits, and give you an idea of what you're going to get. So an idea of a tool, you can go out and download this and try those sorts of things. So that was one program. You can also have other programs within the registries. So one that's common in the three registries that I mentioned is the ARB compliance program. And it's, right, Verra, ACR, and CAR are all approved for it. It's got its own set of protocols and resources. They call their tools resources. They call their methodologies protocols, but it's the same basic thing. And it's handled within the verification guidelines of that registry, who is then going to track those credits over time, but ARB is going to do it as well. So that's kind of what you have going on in a registry. Hopefully you understand now registry, program, standards, methodology, tools, that sort of thing. They're all linked. It's all kind of similar no matter what registry you're using. You're going to get a carbon credit at the end of that. And pretty much everyone out there represents 1 metric ton of CO2 reduced, sequestered. But that's kind of where the similarity ends. So you can have compliance credits. So a compliance credit is going to be an ROC, or registry offset credit, and that's at ARB. You can use that credit in California, under the Quebec market, and it's part now of the Washington Cap and Invest, although you'll have to do a couple other things to use it there. So that's a compliance credit. The voluntary market, so these are the other programs that sit within those individual registries. You have the voluntary carbon standard at Verra, or then they give you VCUs, or what their credits are called. At ACR, you have emissions reductions tons, and at the Climate Action Reserve, you have climate reserve tons that you have. They're all 1 ton of CO2 reduced, sequestered, but they're all calculated differently, and they have different time frames over which they've been calculated, and you're required to sequester. So one of these is not the same across the different registries. What you can do, though, is you can use those compliance credits outside of the compliance market. So I can take an ARB credit and I can sell it to Microsoft, and that's fine. I cannot take a VCU, VCS, or an ERT and sell that into the California compliance market. It doesn't work that way. You have to use a compliance credit in the compliance market. You can use that compliance credit in the voluntary market as well. Hope that makes sense. So let's look at the size and scope of those registries. So the first one to look at is where a lot of the action had been at prior, up to about maybe 3-4 years ago, and that would be the ARB compliance market. Here's what we have. We have 240 million credits of compliance. There was also an early action period where you could enroll prior programs in there. There's about 24 million credits of those. I updated this just the other day, so these are pretty current. 81% of the credits that have been issued under the compliance market have been forest-based, improved forest management credits. So big chunk of what's going on in ARB is forest-related. When I look at the Climate Action Reserve, here I've got a total of 200 million credits that were issued there, or have been issued there. Half of those are compliance credits, so they would be kind of duplicate listed with that ARB one, and the other half are voluntary. When you look at that, 46% of these are improved forest management in Verra, and 55% are compliance, and 98%. So this is pretty much a U.S. registry when you look at it this way. When you're looking at ACR, we have about 276 million credits that have been issued over its span. 61% of those are forest-based, and a big chunk of those have been on the ARB compliance market, 55%. And 97% of their credits are U.S. projects as well. So ACR, I should take off the American Carbon Registry. I apologize to them for that. Is primarily a U.S. registry, and it's about 61% forest credits. Finally, we look at VCS, or Verra, and moving up a factor plus. So 1.1 billion credits have been issued under VCS. Globally, people love their VCUs, right? They don't like the ERTs, let's say, or the CRTs as much. Love the VCUs because it's a global thing and because there's a lot more of them out there. So 1.1 million, remember we were thinking about somewhere in the range of 250 million instead of 1.2. So it's like 5 times as big. 44% forest, right? 3% in the United States. So this is a global registry. It's not as dominated by ARB. I think there's one ARB projects that went through Verra, and only 5% of their total credits have been U.S. forests. So that's kind of an idea of the size and scope of these different registries that you have. So let's talk baseline. So when you're putting together your carbon projects, there are 2 ways that you can evaluate the additionality of your project. So you need to say that you've done something different that gives you additional sequestration as you're going forward. There's 2 baselines out there. There's a counterfactual baseline and a dynamic baseline in forest projects today. By far, the counterfactual baseline has been the most common. That would be ARB's IFM, That will be ACR's improved forest management, including the 2.1. Those are all counterfactual baselines. Dynamic baseline example would be the Family Forest Carbon Program. This would be at VCS. If you get in technical terms there, right, that's VM 00045. And that is a dynamic baseline. How does the counterfactual work? You compare your project activity, that would be the emissions and sequestration, with what you have done in the absence of the project. So if there's a con to this, it would be that there's an incentive to overstate just how bad you are going to be in the absence of that project. That's been a big problem with counterfactual baselines. The pro is, as a forest owner, you're very comfortable generating forest plans. So foresters, we think about the future. We can do a good job of thinking about how we would have managed that forest. Again, the con is we tend to overstate that in some cases. When you're looking at a dynamic baseline, you're going to compare your project activity with what would have happened on similar properties over the same time frame. So the con here is that you need to find a set of forest plots. In the Family Forest Carbon case, we're going to use FIE plots, or forest inventory and analysis plots, that are nearby and similar. There's a similarity calculation in the methodology. But you have to find that and use that as a composite control against which you'll earn credits after the fact. So you move from one time period to another time period. You've changed, your neighbors have changed. You look at how much you sequestered beyond what your neighbors have sequestered. And if you have, you get credits after the fact. The pro here is that the credits are after the fact. The con is also that the credits are after the fact, because vintage of credits, or the year in which the sequestration actually took place or occurred, is important in these credits. And if you've moved, say, 5 years beyond, and you have credits that are 5 years in the past, they're not quite worth as much. So I don't know how that's going to play out. We haven't had credits, as far as I know, issued under this methodology yet. It's relatively new. So how does it work on a counterfactual baseline? This is what most everything has been. I'm going to do an example of ARB here. First, forest owner, right? I'm going to conduct a forest inventory. I can pay someone to do that. I could do it myself. Very risky if I do it myself, because you're going to get verified. Then I have to determine what the common practice statistic is for my region. I have CAR here, but I have ARB statistics as well. They're the same basic idea. And then you have that initial, this dot, initial standing live carbon. And I'm going to look out at that. There's my forest inventory. There's my common practice of 42, but I have 75 tons per acre out there. And I'm going to run a 100-year harvest schedule. And that harvest schedule has to be legal and economically viable, right? You have to be able to do it for it to be a counterfactual you can use. So in this particular case, let's say I went out and I would clear cut a chunk of my forest. It would grow back. Maybe I have a thinning going on, and then another clear cut in the rotation. And so I have a harvest schedule of what I could have done legally and economically viable without the project happening. Now I have to average the 100-year livestock. So that would be this one. So I take that green line and I calculate what the average would be in the baseline in the absence of the project, right? That average line that I get has to be above the common practice line. So that's making it so I don't say I was going to be too awful. I can't go below that common practice. The landowner is going to get a one-time allocation for carbon above the common practice. So for being the difference between 50 and 75, let's say, I'm going to get a one-time payment. That's an avoided emissions payment, or ACR would call it an emissions reduction payment. It works the same basic way in their methodology as well. And then now I'm going to get annual payments over time as that forest grows and I sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. We're going to track that. Climate Action Reserve works that way. ARB works that way. I could have tweaked this graph a little bit and made it a 20-year time period with a 100-year harvest schedule. That'd be ACR. They all work kind of the same way. When I've done that 100-year harvest schedule, right, that line there, I would also be calculating the harvested wood products that would be generated in that project, right, in the counterfactual baseline. and I'm going to average those as well. And in any period that I don't cut as much as I did in the baseline, or maybe I should say where I don't generate as much long-lived harvested wood products, I'm going to get deducted a penalty for leakage. That someone else is going to fill that market void because I have harvested less. One other little point I'll make on harvested wood products is that they are different in each of the methodologies as well. They all use the exact same numbers in how they're doing the carbon and fate. But in ARB, you're going to look at what the average storage is in harvested wood products over the 100 years. In ACR, you're going to look at what's left after 100 years. And in VCS, it's somewhere in between where you're almost doing kind of a dynamic look at it. So who the heck would do this sort of thing? Back in that document that I said we had out there, that was March 2022. I had 149 compliance projects on 5.3 million acres. And you can see on the right what was going on in the voluntary market, 11 CAR projects, 23 ACR projects, and 9 VCS projects. I looked again at this. I did it in 2024 in April. We were at 158 ARB projects for 6.1 million acres, almost 6.2. And we're up to 75 projects at ACR. And when I did it just the other day, now we're at 159. There's been one more ARB project. We're up to 6.208 million acres. And we're up to 83. So there's been quite a few carbon projects going through under ACR. That's been where a lot of the action is right now. And you had another changing of the rules. So just this last June, July. So there were a lot of projects that registered in that period to be under the 2.0 version of the methodology, as opposed to the 2.1 version of the methodology that just came out. Anyway, so 83 projects. These are projects that have actually gone through verification. So I'm not tracking projects by listing. Listing's cheap. You can list a project, sit on it, do nothing. You can list a project, try to get it through verification, nothing happens. So I tend to focus on those that actually go through when I'm looking at what happens in the market. And that's what this graphic represents. So the difference between these two is ARB, those 159 on 6.2 million acres, that's a 100-year commitment after your last monetization. So you have a 25-year crediting period where you can generate credits under ARB. And at the end, the last one that you monetize, you need to maintain those stocks for 100 years. So it could be up to a 125-year carbon project. ACR, it's a 40-year commitment. So it's a 20-year crediting period, and then 20 years you're going to maintain that. Could also be 60 years, right? You can roll that in at the end of 20 years. Hasn't been around 20 years, so we haven't seen anyone do that. I don't know that I would want to do that. Anyways, maybe that's an aside. The two different projects, different time frames. So that's what I was talking about, credits. When you have your ROCs, that's a 100-year thing. That's the same as CRTs. Those are the same 100 years plus. ACRs, you're down there in a 20-year credit in 20 years. So it's a 40-year thing that you have. When you're looking at what you paid for, there's those two basic, I guess, actions, if you will. Avoided emissions. So avoided emissions, that's the difference between the counterfactual harvest or the counterfactual sequestration and your actual sequestration. That is an indirect mitigation activity. And so why I call that indirect is you're not actually pulling any CO2 out of the atmosphere. When you're doing that, you're just saying that you could have pulled CO2 out of the atmosphere, or I'm sorry, put CO2 into the atmosphere, but you didn't. Right? So I don't harvest. I say I would have harvested. I'm paid for those carbon stocks above that threshold, that common practice that I leave out there in the forest. It's indirect mitigation. And I'm calling removals here a direct mitigation activity. When my carbon stocks increase, the flux, I'm paid for it. It actually came out of the atmosphere. It was in my trees. There was direct mitigation that occurred. That's what I'm saying here is avoided emissions indirect. They call them emissions reductions at ACR, removals direct. So if we take those acres, those projects, and here I'm going to focus just on ARB, I could break the credit generation that they've had down over time into avoided emissions and removals. What you see in the graph here over time, these are the vintages of the credits that were generated in ACR's Grid Forest Management. So it's 200 million credits that we're looking at. There was a surge, obviously, in projects that went through, and most of what that was avoided emissions. 80, I guess it's 79% is what we're looking at right now of the total credits that have been generated under the ARB program have been avoided emissions versus removals. So a little idea of the context of these two, right? The context being that one is actually taking somebody out of the atmosphere and one is not putting something up into the atmosphere, and the idea of the magnitude of the use of those instruments. Okay, who's buying these credits? So companies are buying these credits in the voluntary market as well. Amazon, I don't know how much forest stuff they're doing right now. They have a climate pledge. Microsoft, active in the space. Right? They want to be carbon negative by 2030. Walmart is out there actually planting trees according to this. Okay? So you have different companies that are doing it. Also airlines. So CORSIA, which is their plan for emissions reduction, they have goals of where they want to be just like that, and they can use offsets that are CORSIA compliant to get there. Another one would be, state or regional programs. So California's cap and trade program, RGGI, although I don't think they're really using forest carbon offsets there. Quebec uses it, so we'll leave to go to Canada at that point, and then Washington's cap and invest would use credits as well. Usually it's a cost containment mechanism for the cap and trade program that they have set up. Are avoided emissions what buyers want? And so I'm saying I don't think so. And why is because avoided emissions, projects that are heavy on avoided emissions lure in bad press. Bogus credits are a pervasive project or a problem, scientists warn. Airlines want you to buy offsets. Experts say they're a scam. Junk carbon offsets are what these make these big companies carbon neutral. This is why we have rating agencies. This is why groups like Carbon Direct are involved. So you want to get rid of this type of information. And largely, the credits are going to be paid for differently, and that you're going to get more money for a removal credit than you get for an avoided emissions credit or emissions reduction credit at ACR. And the companies are going to require that you have under a certain proportion of your total credits as well in some cases. Right. Another thing that's been gathering press lately are these emissions or the buffer pools, right? So we've had fires on some very big projects. And these projects, when you've incentivized high stocks by paying that avoided emission, you're putting that on a landscape that is dynamic. And so we've had fires, we've had articles written about how undercapitalized perhaps the buffer pool is for California, right? Wildfires moving through the carbon credits, destroying almost all the 100-year credits in one period. Bootleg fire out there, sorry, Green Diamond, but bootleg fire out there, getting rid of some of their credits as well. And that those projects have had to pull out of that buffer pool in order to maintain the integrity of the program. Okay, so to avoid that, now you have things like rating agencies. And so, right, a project is not a project is not a project. Even if you're using the exact same methodology and the same version of the methodology, you can make a good project or a bad project. And so companies like BeZero will go out and look at what you've done and they will rate it. And so here you see a couple examples of some of them on their website that I could grab real quick, where they're rating these different projects, and you can look at a report for how it's rated that way. BeZero is a good one to look at. Calyx Global, same sort of thing here. So they have a project, you find a project, you can see what the rating is, and that buyer can then be a little more assured that that they're not going to get a news article like we saw in the last couple slides issued. Okay, another one is market oversight. And so here I got a little but not really, so I'll probably catch some flack for that. A project, not a project, not a project, even using the same methodology. What if we had some sort of overall market guidance, right? An industry trade group that said these are the principles, the standards of the standards, if you will. And so ICVCM, or the Integrity Council of the Voluntary Carbon Market, is one such effort. And so, of course, here you go, they're leading the way. And they have a set of principles that you can apply to a carbon project or a registry or methodology and see if it meets those principles. They look a lot like what we talked about. What you'll see in here is sustainable development, some more things like that. I didn't mention it, but that's becoming part of these standards at each of the programs we looked at. Okay, so what about family forests? So what I was talking about before was kind of larger forests. It's happened on a couple small ones, but not really. It's kind of boutique stuff that they did. So one example would be under the ACR. So they have it on there, so I can say it. Finite's core carbon, or LandVest, however you want to do that. So you can take acres. In this case, it's not just the Southeast anymore. They also have a Northeast version. You get into that program, it is a 20-year crediting period and 20 years that you maintain after that. So it looks just like the bigger ACR projects. Do you have to do an inventory? No. So they're going to do that for you. How often you get paid? They're not paying necessarily for the credits. They're paying for your participation, if you will. So in the Southeast, starting in the Southeast and Northeast, this isn't for everyone yet, but it is an option. Another one would be the Family Forest Carbon Program. So they went the VCS route. This is that dynamic baseline that I had mentioned. And this is American Forest Foundation. You go out, you have your plot of land that you're going to put in. You have that composite control offsite, and you look at how it changes between the composite control. That's the bad one with the logs, although I think logs could be good. And then yours with all the trees that goes up. They do have a project out there at VCS. So if I'm looking at that, I've got a program, Family Forest Carbon Program. I got the methodology that went on the VM 0045. I even see that they have a project developer. That would be TerraCarbon. So they're listed there as well. You can find all this stuff out on the website, in the registry. Transparency is something that all of these registries are looking for. Right, so you calculate that benefit. Right now, they're not all around the United States quite yet either. This Appalachian one is the only one I could find listed, and it was in the, what was it, to be verified area or invalidation at the moment. So still early stages of that. Forest carbon credits, this is my slide. We're getting towards the end, and I'm going to tell you it gets worse. So we'll go back to these types of credits that we had. We had our ROCs, our VCUs, our ERTs, our carrots, right? Compliance credits, voluntary credits that we couldn't use them that way. ERTs, you're going to have emissions reductions versus removal credits. You've got IFM 1.3 credits versus IFM 2.0 credits versus IFM 2.1 credits when they come. You've got DEBs in California. We didn't hit that one. So direct environmental benefits to the state of California. You're tracking that as well. We've got CORSIA that we're looking at. We've got ICVCM, CCP compliant credits. It is a convoluted space with acronyms coming out the backside. It is a tough space to operate in, right? Abacus, so this was Amazon's brand at VCS that just came out, right? That's another one. So I will conclude and give very generic advice for forest carbon markets as you go forward. One, and this is good advice for kind of everything, work with people who have experience in the space. Ask them what their experience is. Talk to other people too, right? Trust them, but verify that what they're telling you is true. Right? There's a lot of misinformation out there. In the end, it is a verification thing where you have to follow a specific set of rules, right? It has to be that way in the end. Trust what they say, but verify that what they're telling you is true. three works everywhere, right? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? Maybe I don't want to guess slight anything, but you think back to NCX, that looked great, right? We're going to have a 1-year carbon program. I love that they did it. I don't think you get farther in these types of things unless you try new things. But one thing we learned is that was probably not going to work. It was an additionality issue, right? You couldn't do additionality in a 1-year time frame. It was just too much to get. Know what you're signing up for or buying. So if you're in an ARB project, you, the landowner, are signing a document with the state of California that you're going to have to honor for 100 to 125 years. Know what's on the hook, know what you're up for, follow that you're working with good people. I mean, if you're looking at ACR's IFM credits, almost all the credits have been produced by, I think, 6 different project developers. You'd want to be working probably with one of those 6. Know what it costs for what they're doing. And then in the end, have fun. That's it. We made it.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. I'm going to just share a slide really quickly, and then we can jump into the Q&A portion of this. Just give me 1 second. So before we start the Q&A portion, for folks attending the webinar, if you would like to, you can scan the QR code on the screen right now for our post-webinar survey. I believe my colleague Daphne will be dropping that into the chat box as well. And I'm going to advance just one slide that will also have the same QR code in the top left corner, as well as the schedule for upcoming future webinars, and then a QR code in the bottom left corner to register for those. But with that, I will kind of jump into some of the questions that we've received. So Greg, we have a question in the Q&A of how do smaller registries play into this? Players like Pachama, Renoster, NCX, Silvera, etc.
Yeah, I mean, they're out there. I mean, so as I mentioned, NCX at the end, and full disclosure, I was on their kind of science advisory team. Right, they can come and go. I think I like what they did. I like what some of these are doing, and that they're testing the space and they're seeing what works. If you can sell the credit, maybe that's a good thing. But in the end, it's going to go back to these bigger ones. It's going to be the ICVCM is going to be kind of controlling a lot of what we're looking at that these standards and registries have. This is that kind of trust but verify type thing. So Pachama, I've kind of looked at their stuff before. I haven't seen Renoster, Silvera. No, there was, when NCX came out with their thing, there was another company that immediately put out stuff. Know what they're going to have, know what the commitment is. If it sounds too good to be true, sometimes maybe it is, but just be aware of what you get onto. So yeah, that's a non-answer, but
maybe that takes me to the next question. So this, like the carbon market space is rapidly evolving. Do you have any suggestions of where to look to try to stay up to date or see what's happening here?
Oh boy. I mean, we kind of hinted at this a little, like climate week's going on in New York right now. There's a lot of people up there, but that's maybe a tough ticket to get. It is tough to stay up. So just so I live a lot of my life in the ACR IFM space, and just in that space alone, we went through the 1.3 methodology 1 year ago in July. We hit the 2.0 methodology. They changed the way they were looking at harvested wood products. Just this June, July, we went to 2.1. They're changing the way you set baselines. They have a dynamic baseline adjustment of the counterfactual baseline that they apply. Rules have all changed. That is, talk with people who have been in the space and understand what's going on. Ask them how long they've played, what sorts of credits they've worked with, and that sort of thing. That's the only way you're gonna get that. Everyone will love to talk to you, but then ask someone else if they know what they're talking about. I think in the end is the way to do it.
We have another kind of question in the Q&A that is something I think about a lot as well. And so I have a hard time understanding the case for any real climate mitigation benefits, specifically from delaying or reducing harvest. If a landowner is in a strong wood basket, then delaying or reducing harvest probably means shifting that harvest to like a neighbor's property, so no additionality. So could you just provide maybe some context to how maybe both the registries, but as well as like the verifiers kind of explain this?
Yeah. So I'll go, I guess, first from a project development standpoint. When you're putting a project in, one of the things you're looking at is the mill shed that's out there. So you're looking at what mills are around, what products they buy, and how much they buy. And you don't want to have a project that is more than what the local capacity can contain. There wasn't really anything written into the methodology that said you had to do that, but it is something that you want to do as you're looking at it. These days, the projects that we've done most recently have not a lot of avoided emissions. We've really kind of reduced what that is, in part because the price of the credit is lower for the avoided emission or the emissions reduction ton, part because the project proponent might be getting funds from someone else when they're selling these credits, and they're demanding that there not be a lot of avoided emissions. In the 2.1 methodology that I said just came out, they have a wood basket kind of look in it. They just did a webinar on that, I think about a week ago. You could find, I think, on the ACR website. The way to stop it really is that leakage needs to be really high. So we did do a leakage study that I've been very bad at writing up, and we broke credits out by avoided emissions versus removals. You have to calculate it a little different than Brian Murray had done before when you do your leakage. But what we found in that study was it was about 86% leakage on avoided emissions. So very high, and about 20% on removals. It's lower on removals. I think we did a full webinar on this, Brent Sanjan, Adam Dagnow, myself with Michigan State back in February or so, if you want to get more on that. But yeah, if an ACR set up that spreadsheet, you could do leakage separately on the counterfactual component, the avoided emissions, and the removals. And if you did 86% on that, the problem would clear itself up. You wouldn't need all the other rules they have. You just kind of wouldn't do it. So I hope that answers. Yeah, it's an additionality problem. No additionality, no leakage, anyway.
Yeah, could you just provide a little bit more clarity on why credits issued for avoided emissions versus removals pay so differently?
Well, it is that, so you're paying someone that first, I think we are going to have very high leakage. So demand for forest products is what we call very inelastic. And that means that it's going to happen anyways, right? We're going to get our toilet paper, we're going to build our houses, we're going to do our thing, we're going to find that wood, which means it's pretty inelastic, which means there's high leakage in that type of thing when there's actually even additionality in the avoided emissions. But it's also, as I said, it's an indirect mitigation approach. And so you didn't actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. You just said that you weren't going to send carbon into the atmosphere. Whereas with removals, you have done it. Something has come down into that tree in the time period that was specified for the vintage. That's why they're paid. Does that kind of help? Hopefully.
I think so. Here's another one I think is maybe kind of growing in this space a lot is how large of a share of biodiversity offsets when you're kind of comparing to carbon offsets. That was primarily the topic of today's talk. I guess just add a little bit more clarity around kind of that growth maybe in the biodiversity credits.
Boy, I have not. So, I was kind of thinking of carbon credits here, biodiversity. You do have a full section on SDGs, and I usually don't do that part of the greenhouse gas plans or the PDRs. So I would not be the one to answer that, and it would be a bad answer. Sorry.
So we have a question from a person that works at a state forest agency. And I think this is very common through a lot of US states. So they're encouraging private forest landowners to actively manage their land. And oftentimes this is through support for like forest planning, sharing of cost management as well. Do you kind of see this as working at cross purposes with carbon markets?
No, no, I think it can actually, those are not at cross purposes. I think they're complementary in a lot of cases. What we haven't seen a whole lot of, so I call these credits improved forest management. We haven't seen a whole lot of actual improving of forest management within these beyond a delayed harvest or extended rotation. And I think those programs, the state programs, I think it would be great to get out and think of the types of managements you could support that would both enhance the productivity of the forest and generate carbon credits. So an example I can think about in Idaho, let's say, would be you can go out and look for stands that are at very high relative density and incentivize thinning those stands. And by reducing that, right, you're sending less into deferred or slow growth, and you'd be getting less mortality and more vigor, hopefully, in those stands while producing wood products. Good for the landowner. In the state accounting system, it should look good for them too, because it should show up in those accounts. So I don't think they're counter. I think they're actually, they work together quite well.
So we have a question about third-party verifiers. So from some past experience, this question kind of comes from kind of the checklist approach that a lot of verifiers take, maybe leave some things to be desired. What efforts are out there to kind of ensure integrity within those third-party verifiers, or even like verify the verifiers?
Verify the verifiers. That's a little like the rating agencies should come in and kind of help with that a little bit. But yes, a checklist approach. It can be, from experience, when you're working with these or the verifiers, you're going to work with the same. It's a small community, so you're going to know who they are. They know who you are. They know how you do your projects. It's something that kind of develops over time. Yes, they do have to do that checklist type thing because they have to go through and exactly do that. I've seen that be very, very extreme in one particular verifier in the past, where you couldn't, there was no leniency in kind of moving from that checklist or how you do that checklist. And I've seen verifiers appear to be frustrated with the checklist. So if you do all of those things specifically, I can think of one verification document where at the very end there was a finding that was basically that it was very hard to work with that project developer and that they met the intent of the verification, but that was all. And it went through because it was a checklist type approach. So I don't know how you get around that. Yeah, open to suggestions on that, but that would be something you'd take up with the registry folks.
Great. I think that is all the time that we have. So I would like to thank you again, Greg, for being very gracious with your time, for the attendance. Again, we have a post-webinar survey QR code in the top left of the screen right now, and then a QR code in the bottom left if you want to register for future webinars. And then you can see the full schedule of the webinars on the page here. So I look forward to seeing all of you come December 12th. when Raju Pokharel, Assistant Professor of Forest Economics at Michigan State University, will be doing a talk and a demonstration of an online tool to kind of ask some questions around the cost benefit of enrolling your land in a voluntary carbon project. So again, thank you.